So welcome everyone. We are here for a second session of the Neurodiversity Spring Discussion Series. And again, this is part of the Include program run through the Civil and Environmental Engineering Department and funded by the National Science Foundation. And today we're talking about dyslexia, and the goal today is really not so much to give you a set of strategies or specific tools that will work for you. We've read a lot of things, and we feel like, there's no one solution that's going to work for everyone. Everyone's different. Everyone's experiences are different, and so really our goal today is kind of more just to hear directly from two of our very own talented and highly successful engineers in our department, and we're going to hear about their experiences, their perspectives, about what it means to succeed in their field with dyslexia. And so we are going to let them introduce themselves really quickly here, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about kind of the format of the session, and we'll get started. So do you want to get started, either Dr. Hain or Dr. Zaghi?
Go ahead, Lexi.
All right, great. Hi, everyone. My name is Lexi Hain. I am an assistant research professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And I did my PhD at UConn. I did my undergrad at UConn. So I've been around for quite some time and kind of, always having this understanding that I have dyslexia. My mom's affectionate name for me is Dyslexia. Um, but just learning how that's part of me. It's not something that defines me, and finding like-minded people has really, I've come to terms with it, come to appreciate it, and just I'm excited to kind of share my journey, any other questions that people have, and just have an open and honest discussion about it.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. This is Arash Zaghi. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. And I've been working on the topic of neurodiversity, focusing on individuals with ADHD and dyslexia lately in the past maybe 6-7 years. And I have ADHD, I'm dyslexic, so I relate to both groups. And it hasn't been easy, it's not easy yet. And like Lexi, I'm here to have an honest conversation and hopefully learn something.
Great. And I also see that Sean Smith has arrived, and I wanted to just quickly introduce him as well. Sean, did you want to introduce yourself? I'm not hearing anything yet. Maybe I'll just jump in. So Sean is with us again. He's our neurodiversity consultant and entrepreneur, CEO of Don't Diss My Ability, and he is a licensed psychotherapist as well. And he has been a tremendous resource to these conversations over the past several months. And we are so glad you're here again. And please do share your resources and thoughts throughout the discussion as well. So the format of today's discussion will be kind of more just like an informal conversation. I am going to do my best to kind of guide the conversation with some questions, but please feel free to submit questions through the chat at any time. And if you'd rather not submit it in writing, that's fine too. You can just give us a wave with the raise hand feature. And Caressa, who's our GA, is going to be keeping an eye on the chat and looking out for raised hands, and she'll let us know if there are any questions coming in, and we can just incorporate those into the conversation whenever. We're also going to keep a few minutes at the end, probably around 15-20 minutes for questions, comments, sharing. So if something occurs to you during our talk and you don't want to jump in right at the moment, just jot it down and save it for later. That's fine too. All right, so let's get started. And we've heard a little bit about from Arash and Lexi about their experiences. So my first question to you is really kind of to dive into what the motivation is behind participating in this discussion series, and also kind of the motivation for the research that you're doing and the projects that you are involved in. And I'm not sure if you want
So,
me to direct it to someone or if you want to
yeah,
just jump in.
maybe we start with that approach and see how it works.
Sure,
But
okay.
stop me, I talk a lot, so I mean, make sure Lexi has enough opportunities to
Well,
talk.
I'll just dive in
Lexi,
there.
why
I'll
don't you
cut you off
dive in
as
first
needed.
then?
Sure. Well, I think one of the main things is just raising awareness, making this a conversation that can be talked about, that it doesn't have to be a taboo sort of thing. It's just a fact. It's something that exists. There's some challenges that go along with that. There's some strengths, and we can just, no matter how we relate, have a discussion about it. And it doesn't have to be something that kind of hide away. And I think I got involved with kind of the whole neurodiversity effort when I was in grad school working with Arash on an RU program, which was focused more so on students with ADHD. And I think just in all of our discussions, both within that program and outside of it, just brainstorming, just seeing how a lot of times these external pressures or feedback can just be really demoralizing, and how having a sense of community and other people that you can just talk about experiences, like that this was hard, and have some sort of acknowledgement and understand that people go through similar things is incredibly powerful. You know, Arash and I have talked a lot about that. So being able to kind of have some of those conversations, like in this case with a wider audience, but is just really important.
Yeah, just add to that. I agree with what Lexi said. I just add to that those who identify with dyslexia or other neurodiversity types, that's part of their identity, if you think about that. And denying that essentially is denying part of their identity, and it cannot be ignored. That's who we are, and everyone has strengths and challenges in different domains. I mean, like, that makes us humans, honestly. And I think a realistic, truthful understanding of this would be very helpful. And I just emphasize what Lexi said, that like having this conversation openly and in public, it's a major step forward toward destigmatizing these conditions that people are so afraid of talking about, you know, understandably so, you know.
Can you talk a little bit more about what that means, that the experience of having have this be such a stigmatized part of your identity, especially in
Qu
engineering?
Question is directed to me, Connie.
Sure.
Yeah. So I think the stigma is not necessarily engineering. I think it starts a lot earlier, much earlier. I mean, when students are separated because they don't make progress as fast as, for example, like other peers actually, in terms of like reading and writing skills. So when you are separated, you are like assigned to a different group. And I mean, just that forms an idea that like maybe I don't belong, or, you know, like even if they are not told right at the beginning that, oh, you have dyslexia, but just our action implies that. And then it comes to like formal labeling of it. And if you think how it is done, there is nothing positive in this process. So it's all like negative. It's all like to qualify for you for accommodation with good intention. I mean, I'm not saying educators have any intention to kind of hurt people cause problem, but the way it is presented to us, the way the conversation happens, it's fundamentally deficit based. That oh, there is a shortcoming that I have identified in you, and we are gonna work together to fix that. It's a very nice thing to say, but if you look at that, I mean, like labeling this as a shortcoming and like that that you need to be fixed, that starts forming that kind of like stigma, and I think that that is true for all types of neurodiversity. Is not necessarily unique to dyslexia.
Lexi, have you had a similar experience with this sense of stigma or needing to kind of try to hide that piece of you because you're afraid of, you know, how other people are going to react or how you think it'll be labeled?
Oh, absolutely. I think there's in most aspects of, you know, my life, I've kind of like lacked that sort of self-confidence. And when it's something that you know maybe you're not good at, it's just that heightened awareness that maybe people don't always say something, or you know someone made fun of you one time because you read something incorrectly. But just looking back, like terrible experiences in like middle school, just having to read things out loud, like that feeling, even thinking about it, you know, like that sort of anxiety, it just comes back. Where I look back to the only thing I was focused on was being able to count the number of people and figure out all these patterns to how it was going to work so I could practice this, you know, one paragraph, one sentence 10 times and make sure that I'm not going to say the wrong word. That wasn't helping me learn the material. That wasn't taking anything else. All that's kind of trained me to do was to practice hiding the things that I wasn't strong at. And that kind of carries over into other aspects rather than just saying, oh no, I don't like reading out loud. Can I just tell you my impression of it where I don't have to read something? Just, it's, it's
It's very
carried over
interesting
in
you
the
said that,
full
Lexi.
education.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing how strong emotional memories are. When you said something like that, I had forgotten that actually, and now it reminded me that because I did my pre-college education in Iran, and there was so much emphasis on like reading and writing skills, and reading loud was one of my biggest fears in the class, to a level that in fourth grade I stopped going to school. I skipped school for 2 weeks because of the fear of that, because that was the time that we had to kind of like student by student, the teacher used to call on us and we had to kind of go over the text, and exactly the same approach that like I was keeping the track. Okay, I'm the fifth one and each one is reading this paragraph, and like I mean, like forgetting whatever is happening around me and just like reading my paragraph assignment. I mean, like so anxious, sweating, and like it was painful. I mean, like for someone who, I mean, like probably we had all of us have experiences like this, not necessarily for reading loud. I mean, someone may have this experience for kind of speaking in public, or for example, or if randomly you are asked to come in like in front of the whiteboard and solve a problem, you know, that kind of rush of adrenaline, you know, that anxiety that encapsulates you that at that moment, and the pain, it is painful. It's just like it's not being nervous, it's way beyond that, because essentially you are highlighting what I already know I'm not good at. So you're putting me on a pedestal to showcase that. And there is nothing fun about this process. I don't know, like it's as close to torture as you can get. I don't want to make it like a super emotional like conversation, but emotions are intense as related to this.
Yeah, even like talking about it now, remembering it, and just kind of like going back to that feeling, like I'm much more emotional than I thought I would be. And I'm like, you know, try and take that step back. So like, you know, it's not this sort of situation. This is the conversation side. This is what I gravitate to. but it's hard. Like you just can't ignore it. And that was, I don't know, at least
And
15 years ago.
we are traumatizing our kids at such an early age. We talk about all types of abuses, emotional abuse, physical abuse, like dysfunctional families, and no one talks about this type of abuse at school. Um, surprisingly, and kids are traumatized. I mean, like after going through, we are survivors. We are not good examples to talk today to you guys, honestly. I mean, I wish we could bring some of those who didn't make it, who had so much potential, but just because of the intensity of these emotions and traumas, essentially, they said, like, you know, enough is enough. I'm not gonna expose myself to this condition. I mean, there is no good reason for me go to school to be ridiculed. I mean, like, think about that. We go to my daughter, for example, goes to school every morning because she has fun. She's looking forward to play with like her friends and like make things or like, but like for me, everything was about those embarrassing moments and like avoidance of that and how I can control myself, conduct myself my when my emotions are so intense. So your voice starts shaking in that like situation. I mean, like, again, it is not a constructive, way of doing things when you look at that. And we talk about importance of writing. Of course they need to learn how to write, how to read. I mean, like, yes, we talk about that, but I'm presenting to you, and Lexi and we are presenting to you the, another face of it, the pain.
Mhm.
And we want you to be the judge and juries to decide, like doing like a pros and cons, simple pros and cons, see what we are doing.
So I think this is a good transition then for kind of talking about the flip side. So we've been talking about how a lot of these experiences are really highlighting the deficits and the educational process tends to highlight these things. So I know that your perspective and our perspective in the Include program is strength-based, and I was wondering if you can talk about why it's so important um, for neurodiverse students to hear about their strengths and for educators to take a strength-based approach towards neurodiversity in general or dyslexia in particular. Um, Lexi, do you want to start out?
Sure. I mean, I think overall what the strength-based approach is when you just constantly tell people or fixate on what they could be doing better, the motivation to try and grow and do your best and try new things that might be a little risky, it's not there. You're just going to go into the kind of the safer zone of how can I protect myself from any sort of pain. That you probably don't even think about these things that you're really good at and that are valuable and people will appreciate. And having just a strength-based perspective, it's not that you're inventing strengths, you're just switching the focus to things that people already have. Like, for me, one of the big things is I like presenting. I like working on those skills. I like to do kind of those alternate modes because I want to kind of avoid some of the typical reading and writing things that I fixate on and I struggle with, and it has more of those negative feelings. So when I'm given opportunities to be able to talk to people and present, and then I get that positive feedback, it's so validating and it makes you want to do more and more, and how can we incorporate this in other things. And I think it's really just that kind of domino effect that once you have people that just can make that switch, that flip that switch and think about it in a different perspective and just say, hey, are you learning this material? How can you show me that? And I've been lucky in some cases, like in grad school, being able to shift it an assignment, do something more creative, incorporate like making videos, things like that, that I can enjoy the process, I can grow those skills, and now I'm in a position where I can kind of like apply that in my career, where I can make cool presentations, I can do these video tutorials, and it's something that's almost marketable. And if that happened, you know, I'm thinking even at a younger age, there's more of an emphasis on it where someone's like, "Oh, you're good at this. Let's put more into that." Just the opportunities are endless. And so that's kind of my personal experience from the dyslexia side, but kind of with all types of neurodiversity. If we can take a portion of that time that we're trying to force people into these boxes and let them experience succeeding, it's so powerful.
It was very well said. I think I don't have much to add.
Lexi, can I ask you something?
Yeah, of course.
Do you still feel these things now? Like in your
Oh,
everyday?
maybe not in my everyday, but when they come back, it's strong. So recently, I was submitting a paper, and we got the reviews back, and there was comments on multiple misspellings, or it'd be the wrong word. So something that like Word can't solve for me. Like I can fix something if it noticed that I spelled it wrong, but when it's a different word, it doesn't matter sometimes how many times I read it, I can't find that. And the reviewers commented that it seemed rushed. And getting that feedback after knowing how much time I spent on it was really hard. And then on the revision, I spent hours reading it multiple times, making sure my comments back were like pretty perfect. And I got another comment because something little was off, that it was like, you know, it seems like this should be reviewed by an editor. And it was only really like 2 comments where something was wrong. And it's just that sort of kind of what I do about, is there something, like, am I not good enough at this? Like, what is it when I'm putting all of myself into this? You like the technical concept, and we're going down to be focusing on a handful of words that are different. Like, the fact that someone's whole impression of me is defined by that is very hard. So those feelings do come up a good amount.
And if I, Marissa, in response to your question, if I add my observation as, because it's a very recent actually this paper and submitting the responses to revision, it was maybe 2-3 hours of work, but she was procrastinating I kept reminding her like, oh, Lexi, I mean, it's not going to take that long. I mean, let's just like block off your morning and get it done. And like, she was using all the excuses in the world. I mean, no, I mean, this class, I mean, I need to post this thing. I have to grade the exams. I mean, all the excuses in the world. And then we had kind of an open conversation, and it was interesting how fast we went to the roots of that like the avoidance is coming from that past trauma that she doesn't want to expose herself again. It's a very similar, I hope you see the parallel. It's a very similar situation that for her and for me also, we don't process it that way, that I submit this kind of revision, it's going to be okay. It is that I'm going to expose again myself to another round of trash talking and like criticism, you know. Why should I do that? Where's the reward? The reward is not justified. Why should I traumatize myself again? And that's unfortunately I mean, at the level we are, is not avoidable. But I'm sure for K-12 and even like our college, we can think more openly and broadly about what we want students to be good at or excellent at. And I just want to add here that like it is absolutely unfair and borderline criminal to expect students to be good at things that I am good at. Because just I'm good at writing or written communication, and that's why I became a professor or academician, you have to be as good. This is not how the world works. I mean, like, how about, for example, that student that can play 5-minute video game and like embarrass, for example, the teacher? Why don't we have that conversation that like, oh, you should be also a teacher or instructor should be also good at like video gaming? If it should be a fair game, you know, if it is going to be this way, then we have to be good as our students in those areas of strength. So it is kind of a dictatorship in the class. Because I'm good at these things, you should be good at these things. You should become good at things. And this is how I measure success, because I succeeded this way. And that's how I'm gonna evaluate you. So this is more philosophical. I mean, like, I don't know, some of audience, maybe they were looking for some specific tips for how to kind of approach this text, but I think that's a more important conversation to have, particularly because like a large portion of our participants are faculty members. I think keeping an open mind is critical here, and questioning the status quo and like our practices that we are very, very comfortable with.
Can I just ask a follow-up question about that? Is there anything that you would recommend to other faculty in ways that they can provide more constructive feedback in this kind of situation, knowing what you know about how it feels to receive that feedback? Are there certain ways of receiving feedback that have been more productive for you? Does that make sense? Lexi, do you have thoughts about that as a professor and someone who's providing feedback?
I think one of the biggest things from my perspective is who's giving that feedback, and basically, like, do they know me? Do they, do they care about me? Do they value me in some sort of way? Because if it's coming from that sense, then I'm much more open to receiving feedback if I know it's not from a bad place, or if it wants to help, it's meant to make me succeed. But when it's someone where I don't necessarily have that relationship, that's when I tend to feel more judged. Where it's like I can do a bunch of things wrong or need improvement, or I can phrase something a different way. And that's fine. I want to fix that. I want to be better. But I personally need that more personal relationship to feel safer when receiving negative feedback. So I think having those connections with students is really powerful.
Would
Yeah,
it be okay
I
if I
totally
said
agree.
something?
Go ahead, Chris.
From personal experience, saying things like, you need to try harder, or maybe like if you have accommodations, like I feel like maybe you don't need them, or it's unfair to other students, are really things that aren't helpful. Because I myself have experienced putting lots of time and effort into things, only to have, people or professors tell me, well, you should have worked harder. And in myself, I'm like, oh my God, like how could could have worked any harder? So not making assumptions that students are lazy, or that they're not working hard, because I feel like that's kind of the association that a lot of people have. Like if you're struggling in a certain area that's related to dyslexia or ADHD, the automatic thing that I've heard professors or teachers say, it's like, well, you just must not be working hard enough. You need to work harder. And it's not necessarily working harder, it's working in a way that works better for you, which we're not really taught. A lot of us, we have to stumble and fall and scrape our knees and figure that out on our own through a lot of pain. Because we're not taught. We're taught how to be more neurotypical. and we're not taught how to embrace who we are and embrace how we learn and how our, brain works.
Absolutely. And I think, like what you said there, if the default is you're not trying hard enough, if you can have, a relationship with someone where you can be honest, where I want to be able to ask my student, did you give this your all? Or is there something else? Because how you work on those two different things is incredibly different. I know like Arash and I had plenty of discussions while he was my advisor, and he would say, you know, you did not spend enough time on this. And there's times when I'd be like, that's absolutely true. In this situation, I did not. And then other times when I was like, no, I did. And then it's like, oh, okay, then let's break this down. Like, let's talk about what are you not getting in terms of this presentation, because now I see how much time you spent on this and it's not where it needs to be. So it totally shifts that discussion. But you need to have that honest relationship where you can tell someone like, hey, this week was too much for me. Like, no, I didn't give it my all. Or, yeah, I spent 3 times as long as anyone else on this. So just hearing that makes me not want to come to you for more things.
All right, thanks so much for sharing those responses, Caressa, especially. It's nice to hear that, and thank you for sharing. And I'm gonna kind of move the conversation a little bit towards how you see yourselves using your strengths in your career at this point. And strengths has been something that we've talked about in relation to dyslexia. What are some things that you feel like are maybe directly related to the way that you think and see the world because of dyslexia, and also maybe some of the strengths that you've been forced to develop because you're faced with this unique perspective in a spot that's built for people who think differently than you do. So kind of how do you see your strengths and how do you use them in a day-to-day basis? And maybe Arash, you can take this one
Sure.
first.
So I always knew that I'm good at visualizing things, and like I mean in general, like visual arts. I mean, like it has been always my passion. And then when I became more familiar with the literature of dyslexia and the strength-based approach, and like that this is well understood that individuals with dyslexia have typically good spatial or visualization skills. And it's completely understandable. I mean, because you have to absorb information from your environment some way, right? As human beings. Like if it is not through written text or textual information, it's auditory and visual, right? And that is that has been the way humans did it till 5,000 years ago, essentially. And so I think I can see the world rather than read the world. So, and when it comes to, for example, my day-to-day tasks, for example, when it comes to writing a paper, writing a proposal, preparing a presentation, I put more emphasis on the illustrations, for example. I try to use those to tell my story. And it's not easy, it takes time. Good illustration takes a lot of time, but because I know that is my strength, I know I'm not gonna be able to write a paragraph the way, for example, Connie writes it. I mean, for example, but I know that I am able to make a very nice graph or make a very nice chart. So I spend more time and focus on that, and I try to impress my reviewers by having that kind of like highlight uh, or something that stands out and makes an impression. And hopefully by that, I kind of like try to distract them from the text which is not perfect. I'm not talking about the text that has like spelling errors or things like that, but it is not a flawless text. I mean, it is a manufactured text. It is like artificial. It is not natural to me in writing. So I do it mechanically. So that's how I use that, if you call it strength, in my kind of like day-to-day tasks.
So we
If
have
I
a
can,
couple of questions in the chat. Are we ready to start taking questions? Or should we
Can
wait a little bit?
can we hold those questions for just a couple more minutes? And
Sure. Just wanted to let you know.
thank you.
You're welcome.
And Lexi, can you go ahead? And I saw that you were about to say something.
yeah, absolutely. One of the ways that I'd say that I kind of use it to my advantage, like Arash was saying, very much so focused on visual representations and how can you engage people and make them excited about what you're doing with some really cool visualizations. And, just kind of one example, we are working on implementing VR in situations. So when I'm going to talk about that in a senior design class, which before COVID, I did a presentation, rather than putting slides together that focus on VR and how you can use it and what the platform is, I hooked up the laptop to a projector and let someone use it and let people watch that person engage with it. So rather than just kind of feeding them the information, it's like, how can you try it in this way and kind of see if that works for you? Maybe it's not going to be the right option for everyone, but I prefer kind of that interaction, like Arash was saying, you have to absorb that information somehow. So being able to talk about it and being able to visualize it works really well for me. I like to have those conversations and incorporate those visuals as a preferred mode of communication. I really struggle with email. I really focus in on like, how is this going to be perceived? Am I using this correctly? So if I can send a quick chat in Microsoft Teams, and that's something that I incorporated in my classes, is I'm much more comfortable not having to worry about like grammar and spelling as much if it's in a quick communication. I don't want to wait 5 minutes to write an email that's one sentence long when I can send a response back in 30 seconds. So I think that that's worked really well for me and been really good. I feel like we it all.
Absolutely. And Caressa, did you want to bring up those questions real quick, and we'll see how we can address those?
Sure. So the first one is what remote learning strategies can be used to include students with dyslexia? And this is from Kevin.
Remote learning strategy. I think remote learning offers a lot of opportunities, actually. So remote learning is not fundamentally worse than in-class, I would say, lectures when it comes to dyslexia. The lecture part of it, I think it would be the same if you're not dealing with other conditions like ADHD, which attention is an issue or something like that. Remote learning, though, is a slippery slope. If you're talking, when you talk about remote learning, if you're talking about slides full of text, then guess what? It's not going to work well. But if remote learning is that the lectures are like those cool like videos that we see on YouTube about like a physical experiment or something like that, explaining a concept that you don't know, you don't even realize how you spent like 20 minutes watching this. You didn't feel like tired at all or bored at some point. So if you use this like platform to present the information that way, I think actually it is very advantageous. and then it becomes it comes to assessments. Assessments are the same. I mean, it doesn't matter if it is remote or not. I mean, like if it is heavy text based. And yesterday we were just making fun of a very well known faculty member that is not in our
They don't
department.
work there.
Yeah,
It's not, starting
or is
controversy
is not. But like there
we
was
are
something
recording
that
though.
yeah,
So
it was about writing assignment for a design course, and I was reading this, and I was like, what the hell? I mean, just give me a break when it comes to design course. At least I don't need to write anymore. So, and I was thinking about like, I was trying to read through and like go deeper that like how we think about these things and like how ignorant we can be about these things. So things like that, writing assignments, I mean, for something that's not, yes, I mean, if you're talking about like reading some information about, I mean, like historic event and like summarizing that, presenting that, maybe writing is part of it, is natural part of it, or writing presentation is part of it, although there are like alternative modes. But like when we come to like a design course, engineering design course, I think we can really kind of we have to ask ourselves, I mean, is it like the best mode of communication that I'm choosing, or is it optimal to ask students to present their knowledge or understanding using this mode of communication? So yeah, I think if we are careful, I mean, remote learning is not fundamentally more disadvantages, I would say, to students with dyslexia. It can be actually better.
So can we move on to the next question?
Yes, thank you.
Awesome. So the next one is from Sean, and he was wondering if there are any strength-based books or resources for helping people, students with dyslexia.
I'll throw that one to you.
I don't want to say there's none, Sean, because I haven't exhausted, like I haven't done a comprehensive search. I don't know. I would love to read that book if that exists. And I doubt if there is that book out there and we all missed it for years. So probably, I mean that silver bullet doesn't exist. I mean, that's what I can say.
Can I mention something?
Yeah, sure.
So there's actually this book called The Dyslexic Advantage that I listened to it because reading is hard for me. And I actually really enjoyed it. It wasn't necessarily like the strength-based approach, which we're doing in our research, but it was from the positive approach of looking at the people that are excelling. Yes, it talks a little bit about the challenges, but it talks about what the dyslexic person has to offer. And even just looking at like the back of like the excerpt from the bio, the last paragraph says cutting edge research shows they didn't write this sentence well, so maybe they're dyslexic too. Cutting edge research shows dyslexic people perceive the written word differently, but also may excel at spatial reasoning, interconnected thinking, and display amazing creativity. And I know this is the book that helped to change my life in grad school because I had always tried to use text to speech, but it was just too slow for my ADHD brain. And the very last chapter, they recommended increasing the playback speed. And now, like, I'm able to like get through papers, read books, all using text to speech because before reading was just too hard for me. Like, I just couldn't get through it. I would have to read things over and over. So personally, this book has helped me. I don't have a diagnosis of dyslexia, but I know I have a lot of challenges with reading and writing. And this book definitely was not like, oh, like how do you get rid of dyslexia, which is a lot of the titles are like overcoming dyslexia or how to
Yeah,
fix dyslexia.
5 steps to overcome, like 7 steps to do. So
Yeah.
can you put
So,
down the name of the book, Krista, please, in the chat?
so this one is a good one. It's the only one I
Yeah.
know of, but this one is definitely from a more positive perspective.
And the reason why I ask, and Arash, like I talked to you about this not that long ago. My 6-year-old nephew is in the process of being assessed, and the hell that he's going through of having to go to extra tutoring. That he had to go to tutoring all during March break, and him crying, and his parents, his mom forcing him to go do this, and my brother reliving all his childhood trauma by watching what his son's going through. So it's just this, I just wanted to share this story because that's how really it starts. And those are the things that kind of stay with you is, why is it that I have to go to tutoring every day when my friends get, a little bit different now that we're in a pandemic, but why don't I get to do this? Why can't I go do that? Like my 2 nieces got to stay over, but my nephew couldn't because he had tutoring the next day. So there are all these things that these kids miss out on, and we don't really take a look at the long-term negative mental health effects of trying to get them to do this, and him going to a tutor who's going to try and teach him the same way that the teacher tried to teach him, that also wasn't effective. So it piles on and compounds over and over and over. And one of the challenges for me is that I'm too close for them to listen. I'm better known in the States than I am in my own home province and country, right? That's how advanced and progressive this is. That this is still the trauma that we're forcing our kids to experience.
It's very true, Sean.
Are there any more questions in the chat, or folks want to unmute and just say their question out loud? Please feel free to raise hand and we'll take your question.
Yeah, we don't have any more in the chat, so please feel free to just unmute yourself, like Connie said, and ask.
I would love to hear from audience about their experiences or similar experiences with dyslexia, or if they have had any interactions with those with dyslexia, and I would love to hear some of that.
Arash, I have a question because I've been asked to be on the board of directors for our provincial learning disabilities association, and I've turned them down every time because I believe that in many ways they're doing a disservice, right? Because they're trying to teach these strategies to kids who are dyslexic, where basically they bought a program, and a lot of times these programs are created by people without dyslexia for people with dyslexia. And so I'm wondering, my reason for not getting involved is because I think that they're actually doing more harm than good, and I just wanted to get your thoughts on that.
I mean, it's gonna go to dark places, Sean. I gave up on our education system. I think it needs a fundamental reform. I mean, we are past that stage that we can fix it with some incremental enhancements. This is an outdated system that was designed like 70, 80 years ago to mass produce factory manufacturers or kind of workers and engineers that they can like do calcs and design things, or I mean in the area of STEM education. Things have changed a lot. Education system is dragging behind, and I don't know, Sean. I mean, like, you may be able to go there. I mean, be ready for a very strong blowback. If you can resist it, if you have the emotional capacity to fight with it, I mean, go for it. Maybe a couple of people will listen to you, but I think our education system is fundamentally flawed. A lot of people in here will disagree with me and will challenge it, but that's where I am today. Maybe next year I will think differently, but like that's where I am now.
Yeah. I'm on board with you, which is why I can't get involved, because I don't want to perpetuate that. And from my experience, like, we are one of the reasons why I enjoy doing work in the States. Like, I feel like a lone wolf here, because I'm really the only person that I know of that's doing any work that's even remotely like this, right? Whereas in different parts of the States, they're definitely a lot more progressive. So I find that so far I've been able to affect more positive social change from the outside than anybody ever could from the inside. So I have really kind of preferred to do it my way, which I get to kind of pave my own way. And I don't really want to waste my time and energy trying to convince people of something that should just be.
Sean, they make you question your sanity. I've been in those rooms. I've been in those meetings. They make you question your sanity. So, and my question is always to them, when I get really upset with them, it's just, how is it working for you guys and our kids? If you're so sure that this is the way to do it, how is it working? Why are we having this conversation even then?
Well, from their perspective, it's working because it keeps money coming in, right? It's not about the actual help, which is where I butt heads with them. It's they keep their doors open by bringing in money, by claiming to help these kids, which I know they're not doing, but it keeps perpetuating the cycle of the problem. And so that's why I can't get involved.
And I know we're getting close to the end, but Arash, this is something that we talked about beforehand when we were prepping with Connie, that I wanted to make sure that we touched on is recently, kind of like with the IGE proposal, just that right at the beginning, talking about how this is new in terms of, writing and reading. Like, this isn't something that's been around. Do you want
to
give that overview?
Yeah, sure. So recently I was developing a proposal, and for the first time it was heavily focusing on dyslexia, and I needed to go deeper and deeper. And I typically, this is the way I want to understand the fundamentals, why that even exists. I don't really assume that, oh, this is just like a genetic mutation or whatever, and let's agree with that, move on, this is the label, let's become comfortable with that and see how we can fix it. I want to understand more why that even exists. And when I was reviewing literature, I realized that some scholars, they have suggested, and they have even shown with some empirical data, that one of the main reasons that dyslexia exists is because our brain hasn't have enough time in the scale of evolution to adapt to written communication. It was introduced to us just 5,000 years ago. It's a second ago in the scale of hundreds of thousands of years of evolution that it takes us to adapt to something. So it is a very new thing to us. That's why a lot of brains, it's totally foreign to them. So and that made a lot of sense to me, because if you think that way, you will see that it's not deficit based. It's just like you introduce something else. Imagine you introduce some new diet, for example, something that is not human diet, or is not is not something that our physiology can absorb and accept. The reaction is going to be bad. What is poison? It is something that our physiology cannot handle, and or allergies, for example. So, and the same is true for our neurology. We need time for our brain to adapt to new things, and 5,000 years ago, 5,000 years is nothing for our biology to adapt to that. So that was very interesting for me. Because that put it in perspective. I don't know how it helps others, but it was very interesting for me to come across that.
So Sima, this is also related with the brain evolution, right? Evolution such as whether the bring that your understanding level, your express the opinion level. So I feel for the dyslexia, so it is it is two-way. My understanding is two-way. The first one, whether you can understand this message. The second one, whether you can deliver your message to make yourself understood, right? So this means that if some person have this deficiency in either way, they will call it dyslexia. Right? That's the
Yeah, and it happens. I mean, both of them happen typically. I mean, like when you cannot absorb information in written form, your writing is not going to be improved. So yeah, typically they happen together. Some people, they have more difficulty reading than writing, or vice versa. But in general, it happens together.
Yeah, actually, I'm reading one article. I'm reading. They said that for some students, even though they have the dyslexia, but perhaps they are good at analyzing the complicated systems, and perhaps their mindset might be the very complicated, so complex, and they can solve the complex problems. And but the expression capability prevent them to express themselves clearly. So probably that's the challenge.
But expressing themselves by Kuhn doesn't need to be necessarily in written format. There are other ways that information can be communicated, particularly in this day and age.
Okay.
And everyone is moving away from like reading one-page long emails, or so people are less patient actually.
Yeah.
So I know we're running out of time, but we have another question in the chat from Nicholas. So he said that his brother is dyslexic but enjoys writing, and that he submits drafts to the professor for critiques, and he's very vulnerable in that process, but that he gets, some critiques, but they mostly have to do with spelling and grammar, not really with the content of his writing. But he feels attacked. So he's wondering if there's anything that you two can recommend to help alleviate that anxiety through the back and forth writing and editing process.
My biggest thing is just being able to have someone that understands it. I haven't found anything that maybe makes me better about it. I always still have that anxiety, but just being able to talk to people that feel similarly and say like, oh, I got, someone didn't like this because of these small things. Like, does that matter? And then having people be like, oh, those things don't matter at all. You conveyed the message. That's great. I think it's just really important to know that it's really common. It's not, in this case, it's not just him,
So maybe if I can add, like maybe most of those who are in education, they have good intentions. They're willing to help. So when I said education, I gave up on it. It was the system, not individuals, not educators. So so if your brother discusses that openly with the professor, that like, please let's focus only on the content, and then I will seek some help. I will have someone to proofread that or something like that at the stage that the draft is final. Maybe having that conversation is going to kind of reduce the anxiety a little bit. So you're not going to be judged for any grammar or spelling error. And it is not ironic when we are talking about like writing. A lot of good writers, creative writers actually are dyslexic. Because writing is like mechanics of writing, and then expression of ideas. So expression of ideas, they have good ideas and they express it. And then it becomes more problematic when it is like a required writing that you have to submit an assignment. It is not a creative writing. So in those situations, it becomes exasperated essentially. So yeah, there is no easy solution. I mean, communication most of the times help, I would say.
Yeah, I totally agree. Because even with teaching, like I told my students at the beginning of the semester, because I was feeling that way when I was writing things down. It's like, to be able to be writing notes that get projected, I was getting really anxious and embarrassed, thinking that they were going to like judge me about like my spelling or not knowing what something is. And I just kind of like, I was like, hey, I have dyslexia. You know, sometimes I can really struggle with this. If you don't know what it is, let me know. And I found that, you know, I say it as well as writing it, and we've had almost no problems. I look back and a bunch of things are incorrect. They can correct that on their own in their own notes. And it made me feel better, just the fact that everyone was kind of like, okay, that's fine. Like that kind of acknowledgement was really helpful.
Could I say something? I think one of the things that helps me, because it doesn't even just happen in academia, like it happens with my family, where I think people who are neurodiverse, as I said, like I don't have a diagnosis of dyslexia, but I have a lot of the challenges with reading and writing. Um, we tend to focus on what students do wrong, like Sean mentioned, instead of what they do right. So when someone is taking a paper for kind of critiques, the first thing that most people tend to kind of zone in on is the spelling and the grammar, punctuation, when to the creative person, that's not the most important. So kind of having that kind of just that statement of like, okay, I'm giving you these critiques because these need to be fixed, but these are minor. And this isn't what we should be focusing on. We should be focusing on your creative, you know, juices, your style, because you have real potential there. So kind of emphasizing the good and not just the bad, because I think we tend to kind of make things really big when we're neurodiverse, when we hear something like that, and it makes us feel really bad. I don't remember what the word is, but over exemplifying it, and it's like, oh my God, like that is wrong, so the whole thing must be wrong, when that's not the case.
Yeah, I just made a comment about that. Like as you were saying it, like the focus should be on the quality of the content, not nitpicking on spelling and small grammatical errors. Like it's, you know, again, it's the content that's the most important thing, right? So when somebody's picking apart spelling things, I don't think they realize that when they do that, we're questioning the content, not the spelling. So, you know, I think that's an important distinction to make that might help some of the instructors.
Yeah, and just saying that, like, it's imp like, yes, you don't want to have, like, for instance, the other day, my friend in material science engineering, he was writing a paper, and instead of writing prosthetics, like different limbs, he wrote prostatic, so like prostate. So, like, you definitely need to correct those little things where words are similar. But I think just having that disclaimer that it's like, yes, I corrected these things, they're minor, but everything else was like awesome. Just that reassurance. And it's only like a sentence or two,
Mhm.
and it just makes you feel so much better.
And like
They're
you said,
minor things, but they still need to be corrected.
focusing on that content, I think it would be really helpful because, you know, I'm guilty of doing that. Sometimes I'm reviewing something, and depending on who the person is, will absolutely be picky about certain things. But if I can have a conversation with the student and I can know what they need me to focus on, that would be so helpful. You know, for some students, if they really need to work on improving their grammar and it's not something that they're self-conscious about and that I can point out all those things and they can improve, it can be a really valuable learning experience. But if I don't know for someone else and I'm making one of these mistakes, which, you know, it hurts me when people do it to me and I just don't know, uh, it'd be nice to be able to have that conversation back and forth.
Okay, so I'm gonna just say thank you to everyone who is still with us, and we'll probably take a couple more minutes to wrap up. Feel free to leave if you need to. But I wanted to give Lexi and Arash a chance to talk about some of their upcoming research opportunities and programs related to dyslexia. And if you're leaving now, you can check this out in the recording. So thanks.
Do you want to start with IG or do you want me to go to RU?
RU, start with RU.
All right, great. Arash and I actually were I'm PI on it. Just so fun to say. And you're co-PI on a new NSF REU site, which is focused on students with ADHD and or dyslexia, and focused on their strengths, their talents, and bringing them over the next 3 years to UConn for 10 weeks to be immersed in a research environment where they can hopefully be excited about engineering, be creative, and have a little less emphasis on maybe the things that they've struggled with, and just have that sort of sense of community. I'm so excited about that. That's my happiest thing. I love when I get to interact with everyone, and I'm very excited.
So before I talk about IG, I want to apologize if the discussion was not uplifting, because I told Connie when we had an initial meeting that when it comes to dyslexia, it's a lot of trauma. So ADHD, it's a lot of fun. We joke around. It's a lot of like crazy, semi-stupid things that we've done that we make fun of. I mean, but like dyslexia, there is nothing other than trauma, or trauma is so strong that that spills over everything. So I expected this coming to this. So and it happened. So I'm again, I apologize if it was not uplifting the conversation, but I hope it was informative. Related to IGE, it's a new proposal. We haven't received the formal funding announcement, but that is focused on graduate education, and hopefully we can use the mechanisms that are or resources that are available at UConn and beyond to see if we can help graduate students, because when you're a graduate student, there is no way you can graduate without presenting your work in a written format, so or publishing. So we have some ideas that we think would help. A lot of it is raising awareness and facilitating the communication between advisor advisee. But I'm really excited about that, and I look forward to working with a large group of PIs from different schools across UConn and outside UConn, actually, to see what we can do. And I'm very optimistic. I think we will be able to at least raise awareness, and by that help people.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, Connie, for
Thanks so much.
facilitating
This was really great, and I think we did hit some low points, but we hit some high points too there. So don't feel like it was too dark. I think you shared some real experiences, and that's always helpful to folks. So thanks everyone for coming.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Have a good
Absolutely.
weekend.